Hello everyone, welcome to lesson 29 of CSS and HTML, and in this lesson we'll be looking at IDs. An ID is a very similar concept to a class, which we learnt about in the previous lesson, except that the selector looks quite different. Instead of a dot and something, we have a hash and something. So let's do some examples. In the CSS, we'll create something like hash first paragraph, and then apply a whole lot of rules to that first paragraph. So maybe there we go. So that's what I'm saying is my first paragraph. Notice the hash instead of the full stop. Also a customized style sheet, but an ID rather than a class. So to apply this, we would say ID, not class. ID equal to first par for first paragraph. And then it will apply those rules to that first paragraph. Okay, now a very important difference between an ID and a class. With an ID, you can only use it once per page. So I can't reuse this I can't go and say ID equals first paragraph here. It's not going to work. Once you've used it once, that's it. So the idea behind the ID is it's unique. Unique to this page. You can use it on other pages, but on this page you can only use it once. That's it. Another thing about an ID is that if you had, let's say, an ID called XYZ and you assigned it a background color of pink, you cannot allocate more than one ID to the same tag. So remember, with a class we just put a space and an additional class. We cannot do the same thing with an ID. So here we could say ID equals XYZ. That's going to be unique to that tag. You cannot assign any other IDs to that tag. Once you've assigned one ID to that tag, that's it. Okay, so where do we use an ID and where do we use a class? Well, I normally use an ID for something that I'm only going to change once on the page. So you're applying something to a specific area on the page rather than a specific set of rules. So in this case, we're using an ID rather than a class. With a class, we normally apply it to multiple areas of the page. So for example, with red text, it's quite probable that you would want to apply red text to more than one area of the page. Whereas something called first par or first paragraph, it's very generic. It's very specific, should I say. There's only one first paragraph on the page. Wouldn't make sense to apply that to anything else on the page. We can allocate both an ID and a class to a tag. So I could have a class called orange BG, and I could say background orange. But now it's a class, so it's more generic. I can add it to multiple areas of the page. So let's say, for example, I wanted to add a class to this. I would say class equal to orange BG. So this brings up a very important point, that an ID always takes priority over a class. So if we run this, you'll see the background is still pink, and that is because in the XYZ ID we gave it a background of pink. Here we gave it a background of orange, but the ID always wins over a class. Okay. However, if I, for example, set the font family to Comic Sans, that would work because we're setting it to something that's different. The background is being taken care of by the ID, but the font family is being taken care of by the class. So to summarize, you can only have one ID per tag. That ID can only be used once on the entire page. An ID takes priority over a class. So a class, however, has the advantage that it can be reused multiple times over the same page, and you can also apply more than one class to the same tag, which you can't do with an ID. So that ends our lesson in working with IDs.